Hey guys, welcome. If you're looking to get into professional photography and earn some income for your passion clicking the shutter, consider real estate photography. Generally, the housing markets run at a pretty good clip during a normal economy, and real estate photography, or I should say real estate agents, are always in need of high quality photography to aid in selling those properties. The markets have been hot for years, and demand for homes creates a demand for professional photography to showcase available properties. Marketing real estate is like marketing any product. Great photography sells products, and research has proven that. In fact, a study in the last few years by a major real estate company found that homes and properties photographed by a professional photographer sold 20% faster. This is good news for interested photographers, but like any business, there's plenty of competition out there that's quite good at photographing architecture. So to be competitive, it's important to develop a high level of artistic and technical competence and demonstrate that you have the skills to compete. And that competence is crucial to owning a successful photography business. So if you are new to real estate and architecture photography, I've compiled a list of general guidelines to get you started. First, we'll take a look at camera equipment, and you might be surprised to learn that you can get started with as little as a camera, a lens, and a tripod, and then shoot with available light. But you might quickly learn that many of your competitors are very proficient at using supplemental lighting combined with Lightroom and Photoshop, techniques that result in stunning imagery. Some photographers and real estate agents who photograph their own real estate listings have the camera and the lenses but prefer to work really quickly and not use a tripod. And that means a high ISO and a faster shutter speed is needed to obtain a blur-free image, and sometimes that high ISO brings noise and less than desirable results. A tripod is, for most photographers, including myself, a necessity because we bracket our shutter speeds to get a variety of exposures in case there's a need to use HDR software or do exposure blending in Photoshop to combine the best parts of each of those different exposures. Your camera should also include features that allow you to attach a cable release, a flash, along with a variety of different lenses. And of course, you should be well versed in how all of it works. Wide-angle lenses are the most widely used lenses, and the reason is it makes a room look bigger, and real estate agents love that. When it comes to deciding what lens to get, start by looking for a lens based on the sensor size in your camera. If you have a DX or crop sensor camera, there are several zoom lenses available in the 10 to 20 millimeter range, 11 to 22, 12 to 24, and similar focal lengths depending on who the lens manufacturer is. If you have a FX or full frame sensor camera, a lens around 16 to 35 millimeters is perfect for a wide view inside a property. I've been asked about fisheye lenses, and my answer is nope. They create too much distortion and won't represent the property well. A full frame camera with a 16 millimeter lens sees 16 millimeter angle of view, while a DX sensor camera with a 16 millimeter lens only sees 24 millimeters due to that crop factor of the sensor. So this is why you want around a 10 millimeter zoom lens on that body so you get that 16 millimeter angle of view. Now, a very important point which I address in greater detail coming up is that vertical edges on walls, corners, windows, exteriors must all be vertical and not slanted in any direction. It is likely that your wide-angle lens will cause those edges to be slanted when tilting the camera up or down. And one solution is to correct those edges in Photoshop or Lightroom, which is very easy to do. But there's another option, and it is the tilt-shift lens. And these lenses can be adjusted, allowing you to compose your scene the way you want. and prevent those vertical lines from converging or diverging by allowing the camera to remain level while raising or lowering the front element of that lens. And that helps avoid all the Photoshop work. There are several manufacturers who produce tilt-shift lenses, including Canon and their beautiful 17mm tilt shift. Nikon, Sony, and Samyang also make tilt-shift lenses, with Samyang being the only manufacturer who makes lenses for all different camera brands. Now, I admit that a TS lens or tilt-shift lens is awesome, but I don't own one for a variety of reasons. And the main reason is they are fixed focal length. That Canon 17mm lens is only 17mm wide. So if you need a perspective that is, for example, 19mm or 22mm or somewhere in between, you cannot zoom in because it's not a zoom lens. So that leaves two options. Crop your image captured at 17mm and remove anything you don't want to be in the final frame, or move in closer. But it's important to understand that moving closer changes the perspective of your scene. A 16 to 35mm zoom lens on a full frame camera is a better choice in my opinion, even though it's not a tilt-shift lens. You can process the image file and correct all those vertical lines using Photoshop, Lightroom's lens correction tools, and with a lens you might use for everything else you do, like landscape photography, for example. Another point when considering a tilt-shift lens and using Canon's 17mm tilt-shift as an example is if you use a DX sensor camera and attach that 17mm tilt-shift lens, you would only see 24mm because of the small sensor in that DX camera only captures the middle section of what the FX camera can compose. And that means a lot of money was spent on a lens where its full potential is not really being utilized. Now, depending on your style of shooting, you may choose to composite multiple images of each scene, and to do this correctly, all exposures must be in alignment. So the camera cannot be moved during that series of exposures, and reinforces the idea that a tripod should be used. So to avoid camera movement during a multiple exposure set, you can use the self-timer on the camera or a cable release allowing hands-off from the camera. But what is more popular these days are wireless triggers allowing the camera to fire from anywhere around a property, provided, of course, there's no interference with that radio signal. Now, there are more options, and those are smartphone or tablet apps that many camera manufacturers offer that will trigger the camera and also provide a preview of the scene that you just captured, like Canon's Camera Connect or Nikon's SnapBridge app. But based on user comments that I've seen, I think the Cam Ranger might be the most reliable and better option to trigger your camera and quickly preview that capture. You can then make adjustments like shutter speed or aperture or white balance without touching the camera or even being near it. Then for exposure settings, I like to use f9 to f11 on average, whatever shutter speed the camera meter suggests in aperture priority, and an ISO of 500. These settings work well for me, and the result is enough depth of field, sharp pictures despite the long shutter speeds, and an ISO that does not result in super long shutter speeds or excessive noise. And then, as a reminder, always shoot in RAW format because many properties have contrasty lighting conditions, and the RAW file will have more detail and make processing the file and retaining detail in that file, such as highlights and shadows, much easier than a JPEG file would. Then, when approaching the property and determining what to shoot outside, keep in mind that the first image a potential buyer usually sees when reviewing properties online is an exterior photograph, making that image a very important one to get right. So time should be taken to find the best angle that utilizes the best light, but also consider taking multiple angles of the front of the property as long as the light works well for each angle. If you're unsure what the realtor will want, it's wise to ask them what they view as the most important features. Then, if an agent sticks around while you photograph, that helps ensure the agent is happy with what you are doing, and that avoids any reshoots later on. Besides the front of the house and the rear of the house, there will likely be other important features that showcase the property, like a deck, patio, landscaping, gardens, a pool, hot tub, a barn, shop, RV parking, and more. Each of these features should be emphasized in the composition, and if you can, include a foreground or the surroundings of those features as compositional elements, and you'll have a more powerful image like this garden area. Photograph other features just like you would the home. If the property had a unique garden shed, for example, consider making it the prime subject in a broader composition, followed by the flower garden right beside it or in front of it. A swimming pool captured from an angle that shows the pool, the patio, and the backside of the home can tell a great story of that property in one photo. So look for the best angles that tell the strongest story. In this backyard right here, the client was interested in the outdoor theater under the cover on the back porch, which I captured, but I also captured this image showing the patio furniture and giving a broader view of the backyard and the back of the house. Now, some houses you might find yourself photographing sit on mostly flat ground, while others do not, meaning a perspective with a camera down low and looking up is not going to be ideal in some cases. So here, a pole photography setup where the camera is attached to a long pole, like a painter's pole, allows the camera to be positioned much higher for a more level view. However, today's drones with cameras are becoming popular, especially for homes on properties where an aerial view shows not only the structures, but how big the property is, and that impresses buyers. Most outdoor subjects benefit from early or late lighting, including real estate. And one way you can determine the best time to photograph is by using Google Maps and Google Earth, and that can help you determine the best time of day prior to even going to the photo shoot. Searching only takes minutes and provides an idea whether a home faces the sunrise or sunset or neither direction. Then another tool I use is my preferred method, and it's to use the app Sun Surveyor, where I can determine what time of day the sun hits the house and at what angle. I will start with Google Street View to see if there are any big trees or other features that would cast a shadow on the front of the house. Then move to the Sun Surveyor to finalize the time to photograph. In the winter, some homes never have the sun hitting the front of the home, possibly forcing you to shoot into the sun. So to avoid that, choose a camera angle where the sun is at the same end of the house as the camera, allowing you to photograph away from the sun. If the perspective of the home is best from the right side, wait for the sun to also be on the right side and behind the home where it already is, and this avoids shooting into the sun. This house here has a huge yard and a street lined with cars, so photographing from the left put the sun right above the roof, allowing it to shine on the lens. And I couldn't back up any further, but moving to the right side was the preferred perspective because it kept the sun on the right side and out of view. Overcast skies can eliminate any problem with the sun's position, but of course, shooting on a poor day is a decision best discussed with the realtor. The advantage is you can shoot any time of the day, but the disadvantage is the white sky. It can lessen the impact of an otherwise great exterior image. So white skies may require time on the computer to replace the white sky with a blue sky using Photoshop's sky replacement tool. The dusk dark technique is often requested by clients because it helps sell the properties. The home is photographed outside from the best angle to showcase the house. Then all the rooms seen from the camera have their lights turned on, and at a certain time after the sun sets, the sky's exposure will balance with the room lights pretty nicely for a perfect exposure. This technique can also be accomplished by adding lights to every single room and creating the same effect of the windows being lit up with a darker outside. The advantage to working this way is not having to wait for the perfect balance between the room lights and the outdoor lights or the constant lights, giving you more time to do several angles utilizing the same effect because you're using flash or strobes. Now, we also know homes come in all shapes, sizes, styles, and conditions. Some will be in immaculate condition and others will not. Some will be clean and prepped for the photo shoot and others will not. I always tell my clients that I'm not in the house cleaning business and that all preparation should be done prior to the photo session. To ensure this happens, I developed a task list that can be sent to the client ahead of the photo shoot so the homeowner knows what needs to be done prior to the photo session. Then once inside, which rooms should you photograph? Well, a simple answer is most of them, but not always all of them. The living room, kitchen, dining room, master bedroom, master bath are all must-shoot rooms. Depending on the home, there could be a library, an office, large walk-in closet, and other specialty rooms that are also important features of that home. I photograph them all because I know that the realtor will expect that, and if I leave something out, they will ask about it after the job, and I might have to go back. When you're ready to shoot inside, seek the best perspective for each room. I like to describe my approach when choosing an angle in an interior to use the inside elements, such as furniture, windows, and the room layout to create visual flow. Now, while there are no rules, I generally try to avoid placing something in the foreground that is large and prevents the eye from flowing through the room. So instead, I look to provide a visual pathway through the rooms in that photograph. I am photographing the room after all, and the furniture are simply props that complete the room. It is also important to make each room look spacious, but with a balanced approach. Wide-angle lenses can make small rooms look much bigger than they really are. And while this can be good, it can also be bad. Some buyers are really put off when a room is much smaller than the photo represents. And many wide-angle lenses may also suffer from barrel distortion. That all depends on the manufacturer of the lens, and the amount of distortion, if any, will vary. But higher quality lenses often have less lens distortion, but with a higher cost for that lens. Now, I just mentioned that there are no rules. That's not always true. There's one rule that I mentioned earlier, or there's at least broad agreement among clients and photographers that if there is to be a rule, it will state vertical edges must be corrected. In most interiors, there are edges and corners of walls, door frames, windows, and the vertical sides, and these edges need to be truly vertical. When you use a tilt-shift lens, this problem is solved, but tilting the camera up or down with a non-tilt-shift wide-angle lens makes vertical edges converge or diverge, and they are no longer straight. Edges that are angled are generally not acceptable in real estate or architecture photography. The camera can be leveled using a hot shoe bubble level, ensuring the edges and corners will be straight. While this is a simple solution, it's not always the best solution when using a non-tilt shift lens. A level camera at chest height can result in foreground subjects like furniture being cut off at the bottom with too much ceiling at the top. Lowering the camera height will improve this problem, but at what expense? This image by one of my online course students, Simone, illustrates this point. The camera is chest high and is leveled to avoid diverging lines. The problem, as I mentioned, was that the foreground furniture is cut off and there is too much ceiling that lacks interest. Simone also shot this bedroom image the same way. It looks really good from a technical standpoint, but I advised against this camera height because it's simply too low and appears to be captured by someone on their knees. The bed and the furniture get only about 1/3 of the composition, and the walls and windows get about 2/3 of the frame. So what is the perfect camera height? Like everything, there's differing opinions, with some preferring chest height while others photograph a room from doorknob height, and all to avoid having to deal with vertical lines. The ideal camera height should allow you to see on top of the kitchen counters, on top of the beds, the bathroom counters, and so on. My preferred style is chest height or close, and correcting vertical lines using the methods previously described. The tilt shift lens is ideal, but when I use a different focal length on my 16 to 35mm lens, the lens correction tool in Photoshop does a very good job of straightening vertical edges. This image shows the use of Photoshop's lens correction tool. The bed and furniture consume 2/3 of the frame and provide a fuller view of the room, while the vertical lines, like the edge, are all perfectly vertical. Then the perfect interior exposure is challenging when conditions are bright, making accurate exposures occasionally difficult. The brightness levels between windows and interiors can be extreme, resulting in an interior that's very dark with perfectly exposed windows, or windows that are blown out and flaring when the interior is perfectly exposed. Fortunately, digital cameras, processing software, and supplemental lights can solve these issues. This room has a dark ceiling, dark furniture, window flare, and hot lights, and the results in a lot of contrast for a single image capture. You can deal with scene contrast many ways, and one is to shoot when outdoor light levels are lower. Midday light will be much brighter outside than during or after sunset, or on a cloudy day. So turning on every light inside increases the interior brightness, and if the outdoor brightness is lower, a RAW file can often capture the scene in one frame and develop it properly. This image here captured on an overcast day, and it shows the interior exposure is quite good, as well as the window exposure outside. So here I only needed to add a flash that was bounced off the ceiling to bring the darker side of shadow brightness up a little bit brighter. So to get the perfect exposure, I always start by determining my base exposure, which is the image that has most of the data centered in the histogram, and then some of that data may fall off the ends of the histogram due to the scene contrast. But I start there, and then I bracket my exposures widely in +1, +2, -1, -2 increments to ensure I have all the exposures and the data placed. Then Lightroom and Photoshop, and certainly other programs, allow you to selectively lighten and darken areas within a photograph to fine-tune that balance between shadows and highlights. Then the adjustment brush in Lightroom is a great tool for bringing down the brightness of a window and brightening the end of the dark areas. The adjustment brush was used to bring down the brightness of this window. HDR is short for High Dynamic Range software, and it's very popular with some interior photographers who prefer to not add lighting. It brings the scene contrast to a manageable level, but like all digital photography software, it can be overdone. Halos, gray patches on the walls, and in the skies, as well as edges, are often a sign of overprocessed HDR. Using the exposure fusion feature available in some programs can help avoid these problems, but I personally only do HDR if I have no choice and instead prefer to add supplemental lighting. My opinion on interior lighting is just like a finely lit portrait. Room interiors can benefit greatly from nice styled lighting. While HDR can manage scene contrast, it does not create highlights and shadows in areas that have no directional light. So if you had, for an example, a dark cabinet against a dark wall, adding supplemental lighting can bring that needed detail out by brightening and adding subtle highlights to details and edges. When photographing, most interiors have two light sources, the window light and the interior light, and both are constant light sources, meaning they don't flash. You can add scene contrast using lights in the form of hot lights or cold lights, or use strobes or flash. Constant lights, unlike flash, are on or off, just like the lamp on a table in the window or on an end table. Changing your exposure to darken the window light exposure also changes the brightness of your supplemental lights effect in a room when choosing constant lights. Flash or strobes are not constant lights, so if you change the shutter speed to darken the window light exposure, then the flash exposure will not change. And this is the benefit of using flash or strobes to add more flexibility when adding light to interiors. Photographers shooting for architects and magazines often have plenty of time to photograph a property with finely crafted lighting techniques, but real estate photographers' time is usually limited, making flash the perfect tool. Some photographers have mastered the balancing act of using direct on-camera flash to fill in the room's shadow areas, while others use their on-camera flash in a bounce capacity, which creates a soft quality light and fills in a broader area due to that bounce approach. In this scene, the only lights are coming from a window on the left and the ceiling fixtures in the kitchen, and that left dark areas in the front. Then a bounce flash was added, handheld, just to the right of the camera to fill in those darker areas, and it did it effectively. Also popular with photographers is a multi-flash wireless setup that allows the flash to be placed around the room for a more stylized lighting approach with light coming from multiple angles. Then there's another somewhat popular way to light using light painting techniques, where the flash is used to selectively light specific areas, and while the effect looks cool, it takes much longer to process the photos. So in this case, I only use this technique for my more high-end clients who are willing to pay for the time and effort that goes into using that technique. Now, I will mention one side effect of outdoor lighting mixing with interior lighting, and that is lighting color balance. This is different than camera white balance settings, where the white balance is set to either specific areas of your scene or set to average all the light sources together using auto white balance. Here, this photo shows a blue color cast on the right side of the window as well as the floor on the left side. So when you have mixed light, such as daylight colored window light mixing with tungsten colored ceiling lights, and then you throw in a fluorescent light in the kitchen that happens to have fluorescent color lighting, you have a veritable palette of different colors all mixing together. So what usually happens is anything like walls closest to the windows will be bluish in color, while the walls closest to the lamps will be amber in color, and then of course the ceiling in the kitchen will have a green tint from the cool white fluorescent bulb. In the final version of this scene, the image shows color correction in those areas, as well as corrected verticals and a retouched window flares. Now, in some cases, the effects of mixed light will be minimal, and other times it will require your attention. And you can prevent mixed color in many cases by matching the color on the inside lights to be the same color, or use Photoshop's color correction techniques to change a specific color in an area that's incorrect. Okay, what about drones? I mentioned previously that drones are today's go-to approach for overhead views of certain properties, and it makes sense to add this to your business at some point. But it depends on your business and where you're located. I do need to mention something very important, and that is you will be required to be licensed by the FAA, and you can do that by completing and passing the Certified Commercial Drone course to legally perform aerial drone photography. And that allows you to film anything with a commercial angle to it. And even if you're doing it for free, you're going to need that license. This is required, so don't overlook or ignore the importance of this. Why? Well, an online search might take you to the story about the photographer, I think in New York, who was fined $162,000 for not having the license. Then in 2022, the FAA announced they are going after realtors who hire unlicensed photographers to photograph aerials of properties. And those realtors are being fined $10,000 for hiring unlicensed photographers. So, can you imagine being fined by the FAA and also sued by the realtor because you are unlicensed and they want their $10,000 back? Okay, when your photo shoot has been completed, it's time to optimize the images prior to delivering them to the client. Photoshop and Lightroom are both excellent programs, although there are others that can do the job like Affinity. One advantage of Lightroom is its data asset management ability, where you can file all your photos in a catalog system for an easy lookup. Lightroom is an excellent choice, and it's pretty much the same engine as Adobe Camera Raw is in Photoshop. But in Lightroom, you can lighten and darken, add contrast, adjust color, do bulk processing, and selectively process specific areas like the sky. Here again, you can lighten and darken the sky, add or change color, adjust contrast, and so much more with the masking and adjustment brush. Photoshop also has most of the same adjustments in Adobe Camera Raw, but the advantage of Photoshop is layers and the ability to combine a series of registered images. Remember the mention earlier about bracketing exposures when shooting? Layers provide the ability to use parts of each of those images to be stacked in layers and then exposure blending them to create the final image. Photoshop also has the sky replacement tool, so you can add a sunset or a blue sky or clouds on any image captured on an overcast day. Once you're done shooting, now it's time to prep the final images for the client. I will send full-size 72 DPI lower resolution files for use in the multiple listing service and also 300 DPI high-resolution JPEGs in case they want to advertise in a print publication. Most multiple listing service websites specify what is the accepted format, so I use Photoshop and the Save to Web option for those low-resolution JPEGs. I also send the JPEGs and TIFFs as needed to my client through Dropbox, but I also keep the PSDs for myself, those Photoshop files. Okay, I'm going to wrap here by mentioning that there are many styles and techniques that you can use to photograph architecture and real estate. And since real estate photography is a business, profitability will be a primary concern. So it is important to develop your own style and strategy to ensure you have a profitable business. I will always remind myself that I am not photographing for me, but rather photographing for a client who will expect professional quality work. I also know I do not need all the best gear and get only what's required to do the job. I have worked hard to master the creative side of photography, such as angles and perspectives and composition, while also mastering the technical side of exposure, HDR, supplemental lighting, color management, and exposure blending. To my online course students, I remind them to always look to broaden their horizons by considering this point. Real estate photography is architecture photography, and you can photograph a home for a real estate agent for, say, $300, or you can photograph a model home for a home builder for maybe $1,000 or more. Then there's even more money in shooting hotels and resorts, and they pay even more, and it's all architecture photography. Okay, if you'd like to learn more about mastering the craft of real estate photography and architecture, check out my best-selling photography course online called Mastering Architecture and Real Estate Photography. It's over 12 hours long and includes everything mentioned previously in camera gear, lighting techniques, managing color, and an extensive section in processing in Photoshop and Lightroom. And you can see the link below in the description. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe And I wish you great success with your photography.
Hey, thanks for watching New Photography School. Be sure and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of our upcoming tutorials. Keep shooting!